Okay, so today we will discuss about the congestion control. Congestion control is a topic which deals with three major layers: data link layer, network layer, and the transport layer. So we will discuss about the congestion control from the perspective of the network layer and the transport layer majorly. From the perspective of data link layer, we don't need to do it in kind of detail, but I will provide you a PDF so that once you have the concept of congestion control and you read that PDF, it will be well understood to you. So this is the first thing that we will do. This topic we will finish in maximum half an hour, and post that we will take the protocols which are important for the entire OSI layer. So we have 7 layers, and in all those layers there are different set of protocols. So we will discuss about those protocols. What are the important points that you need to remember for those protocols? What are the functions of the protocols, port number, and static and dynamic, all the kind of details. So these are the two topics that we will try to finish today. So first let's start with the congestion control. So first you need to understand what is a congestion. So congestion in any network can occur if the load on the network in the terms of packet that is being sent onto the network is more than the capacity of the network. For example, the similar example I will take: if you have the capacity of reading for, let's say, for straight 1 hour, you have the capacity to sit and read things, but I make the class for 3 hours and I don't give any kind of break. So your mind will be in a congestion state. You will not be able to grab, because the things that I'm providing you is beyond your capacity. So the similar kind of things can happen in the network also. We know that there will be a sender and there will be a receiver. So if the sender is sending at a very high rate the data to the receiver, and the receiver does not have that much kind of capability and the capacity to handle those packets sent by the sender, then there will be a congestion in the network, because the incoming is very high as compared to the processing which can be done at the receiver side. So this is the major issue why the congestion occur, due to the different rate of transmission and different rate of what you can say, acquiring of the packets or consumption of the packet from the receiver side. So if the speed is not matched properly, then there will be a congestion. Congestion is something which will happen when the network is overloaded. When the network is overloaded, then the bandwidth of the network is utilized at the full capacity, and still we are pushing the things in the network, so there will be loss of packets, and we don't want that. So if there is a situation where we can see that okay, the congestion can happen in near time, or the congestion has already started, then in those all scenarios we have to apply some mechanisms where we have to control the congestion. So those all mechanisms are called as congestion control, which we will discuss in the class. And there are two ways how to control the congestion. The very first way is to avoid the congestion. Means, let's not get into those situations. Let's have some pre-filter things and apply those things so that we don't enter into the congestion state. So like kind of prevention of the congestion, or avoidance you can say. And the second one is that let the congestion happen in the system. We don't care if we don't pay attention if it is going to happen or not. Let it be. And if the congestion happen in the system will be able to tell us that the congestion has happened, because there will be loss of data. And then we will apply some congestion detection and prevention techniques once the congestion is already being diagnosed. So these are the two ways how to control the congestion. The very first way, try to avoid that it doesn't occur. Second, let it occur and then handle it. So these are the two ways. So here the congestion control refers to the mechanism and techniques to control the congestion and keep the load below the capacity of the network or the receiver, so that the data cannot be lost. Congestion in a network occurs because the routers and switches have queue buffers that hold the packet before and after processing. So basically, you know that whenever there is a sender and there is a receiver, they might be linked directly, like node to node, they might have a direct link. At the same time, there might be a situation where they are linked indirectly through the means of different routers and switches. So these routers and switches or whatever are the network devices which are connecting your receivers and senders, they also maintain a kind of buffer, queue buffers also, they maintain those things. And sometimes what happen, let's say their own capacity is very less as compared to the capacity of the receiver, they might be the reason also to have the congestion in the network. So basically you have three players in the entire network: sender, receiver, and the network devices operating in between sender and receiver, responsible to send the data from sender and receiver. So the capacity of the receiver and the capacity of the intermediate devices through which we are communicating, out of these two, whatever is the minimum capacity, that will be the capacity of the entire network. Because if any one of these is not having the capacity to hold on and process the things which are getting from the sender, there will be loss of packet either during the transmission once they reach to their routers, or there may be, if that is not the case, then there will be the other loss of things which will happen at the receiver side when receiver is not able to handle much. So these are the things that we have to take care. So first thing is that the rate of packet arrival is higher than the packet processing rate, means the rate at which the packets are arriving at any network device is greater than the processing which can be done at that particular network device. So here the input queues become longer and longer, means we are getting more input on the input side. And second is that if the packet departure rate is less than the packet processing rate, the output queue become longer and longer. So there are two kinds of queues which are maintained by the system. Number one is the input queue and number two is the output queue. Input queues is like you are getting something from the network, and then you have to process it, and then maybe you might need to send it to some other person also. Other person meaning network devices only, let's say from one router to another router. So the congestion can happen from the perspective of input buffer or from the perspective of output buffer if any of the things are not matching the processing time. So these all things are there responsible when we get to know that there is a kind of congestion in the network. Is that clear? What is congestion? What is congestion control? How the congestion can occur? And there are two kinds of techniques, avoidance and prevention, that we need to provide when we are having any congestion in the network. Is that clear? Okay. Now, the next thing that we need to understand, there are some terms that we need to know before we move further in this topic. Delay versus load. How these two things are related to each other. Like if the load is high, how much will be the delay? If the load is low, what will be the effect on the delay? So how these two things, delay and load, are related to congestion and network. So note one thing, that when the load is much less than the capacity of the network, the delay is minimum, right? So if you are less overloaded or you are not loaded at all, then the delay to perform things will be minimum, because you will have less thing at your disposal. You will have very less amount of things to take care of. So your delay, or you can say waiting time for every particular process or task that you are doing, will be less. So it is like kind of an inverse relationship. When the load is less, sorry, direct relationship. When the load is less, the delay will be minimum. So here this minimum delay is composed of propagation delay and processing delay, both of which are negligible. So there are two kinds of delays which are involved. One is the propagation delay and one is the processing delay. Propagation delay means sending one thing from one point to another point, and processing delay means processing the things at that point of time or by any particular system or the network device. So these two things are the things which will cause the delay, and the delay will be very minimum if the load is very less, and propagation and processing both will be very less if you have less load in the system. Now, however, when the load reaches the network capacity, so definitely there will be a network capacity that we call as a bandwidth of the system. So when the load reaches that network capacity, the delay increase sharply, because now we need to add the waiting time in the queues for all the routers in the path to the total delay which is encountered in the processing and the propagation. So now the delay becomes infinite when the load is greater than the capacity. So what will happen? Let's say there was no load in the system was behaving good. Then we started sending packets. Time by time, we increase the load on the system. So there will be a time when the load in the system or the load in the network will reach the full capacity. Like your entire tunnel is full. You imagine it like a pipe. You are sending small amount of water. Then you start feeding it with not water, because water will not be like blocked there. Let's assume some solid stuff sent by a kind of tunnel. So if there will be less solid stuff in the tunnel, it will be able to move easily. Otherwise, when you keep pushing a lot of solid stuff inside the tunnel and try to move that from one end to another end, it will increase the kind of force that you will require to push the things from one end to another end, right? So now you have to provide some extra force from outside to send this from one point to another point. In the similar manner, when the load reaches the network capacity, the delay increases very sharply. Exponentially, it increases. Why it increases exponentially? Because the waiting time in the queues, that is the incoming input queue and the output queue, will increase the time for the total delay. Now, consider the size of queue when almost no packet reaches the destination or reaches the destination with infinite delay. The queue become longer and longer. So now the rate of transmission is getting affected. The things either are not reaching the destination at all, or they are reaching the destination with such kind of a delay which is as equivalent to infinite. And when we say infinite, we want the internet to be very responsive. We don't want the system to make us wait to load a web page for more than 5-10 seconds. We lose our patience. We want higher response rate. So when we say infinite, it is not infinite. It is more than the time during which the TTL can be alive. So the time to live, if it is expiring, then it is as equivalent to the infinite delay. So what will happen? Your queues are loaded, your network bandwidth is completely devastated, and now there is an infinite delay introduced in the entire system. So your packets are not reaching the destination at all, or are reaching at a very huge amount of delay, and this makes the queue even more longer. Now this delay has a negative impact on the load and consequently the congestion. So basically what happens, due to this delay, the load which was increased, the delay which got introduced, consequently it affects the congestion. So when the packet is delayed from the source does not start receiving the acknowledgement. So you know, whenever the source is sending something to the destination has to acknowledge it, so that the source get to know that the packet that I have sent is received properly. And if the source doesn't get to know the acknowledgement within a specified amount of time, then source understand that either the packet is lost in the network or the packet is lost at the receiver side. So it needs to retransmit the packet, right? Which makes the delay even more worse. So for example, I'm teaching you something and I ask you, is this all clear with you? And nobody is responding that whether it is clear or not. So what I will do, I will teach that thing again. I will assume that I will wait for, okay, let's say wait for 5-10 seconds. And if the response is not coming in 5-10 seconds, I will assume that this was something which is hard and people are not able to understand. So I will repeat the same concept by my assumption. Even if you have understood it properly, you haven't provided me any acknowledgement. So what I will do, I will retransmit the same knowledge, which will make the class even longer. So the same thing is happening here also. When the load increases, the congestion increases, the delay get introduced, and many a times the packet is not received and the packet is there in between source and destination. Acknowledgement is also not received because the network is so much congested. So the sender will think the packet is not arriving at the destination. So after a certain point of timer, it will retransmit the packet. So there will be duplicacy of the packets in the network. And due to this, the congestion in the system, which was already very bad, will become more worse. So this is the thing that happens, and this is the relation between the delay and the load stuff. So as more is the load, the delay will be introduced, and congestion situation will be dire in this situation. Is this okay? Delay versus load. Yes or no? Okay. Now, throughput versus load. What is the throughput? So there are two things. One is the bandwidth of the system. Bandwidth is the maximum capacity. Bandwidth is the maximum capacity, which is like a kind of predefined factor, which is a kind of static factor. You can assume it like a static factor. That is the bandwidth. For example, let's say you have a home, and there you have a capacity of 5 people, let's say. Maximum capacity is that only 5 people can live in that house. So that is the bandwidth of that house. Only 5 people can live. But the other concept, that is throughput, that is different. Throughput is something which is at the current moment, at the snapshot of that particular time. So basically, what is the throughput? Throughput is something which is the rate per second or per minute or something like that. The unit of throughput and bandwidth both are same. Both are same. But throughput talks about something which might be lesser than the bandwidth also. Bandwidth is the maximum capacity. Throughput is something which is like the capacity of the network as per the current situation. Like what is your efficiency right now? What is the situation right now? That is the throughput of the system. Now, let's understand the difference, the relationship between the throughput and the load. So, the throughput of the network is defined as the number of packets passing through the network in a unit amount of time, right? It can be less, it can be more, it is not static. It will change as per the load, right? Bandwidth will not change as per the load. Bandwidth is the maximum capacity. So remember this two difference thing, like the difference between these two things, that is throughput versus the bandwidth. Now here, when the load is below the capacity of the network, the throughput will increase proportionally with the load. So throughput is like what? How many packet can pass through that network in the unit amount of time. So if the load is less, maximum number of packet can pass, right? Because there will be no kind of traffic. Traffic will be very less. So maximum number of people can pass through unit amount of time with a greater speed, because the speed will be very high. Now, when the load is below the capacity, the throughput of the system is high. So they have the inverse relationship. Load is less, throughput is high. Now, we expect the throughput to remain constant after the load reaches the capacity, but instead that throughput declines sharply. So the ideal behavior says that even if the load increases, the throughput should remain same, but it is not happening. At a certain threshold, at a certain point of time, when the load reaches the capacity or nearly, like it is close to the capacity of the network, the throughput will decline sharply. This is the thing. So inverse U kind of graph will be made. And this states that till the capacity is not reached, load is not reaching the capacity, you have a kind of increasing graph. Means load is increasing slightly and the throughput is not declining. But as soon as you reach the capacity, the throughput will decline sharply. And this is the reason why the packet get discarded by the routers, because throughput is something which we talk about for the network devices between the sender and the receiver. It is not something which is related to receiver or related to the sender. It is something which we are talking in between. So now when the load exceeds the capacity, the queue become full and the router have to discard some packet because the queue is full. And now here what happened, discarding these packet does not reduce the number of packet in the network, because the source is not getting the acknowledgement. So it will start retransmitting the packet. And due to this, whenever the packet is not reaching to the destination, the source is again resending the packets, and the situation is not going to get better in any time. So these are the two things, throughput and delay versus load, how they are related to each other. So throughput will increase till you don't reach the capacity. Throughput will decrease sharply once you reach the capacity. So these kinds of statement can also be asked in the exam. Remember, load versus delay, the relationship is direct. But with the throughput, it is inverse. When the load is very less, the throughput is high. When the load is very high, the throughput declines. So it is inverse relationship. Now, congestion control. We spoke about if there is a congestion and the relationship between some parameters. Now, if the congestion is there, how to control that congestion? Because if there is a problem, we have to solve that problem. So congestion control refers to the technique and mechanism that can prevent the congestion. We have to control the congestion before it happened or remove the congestion after it has happened. So if it has happened already, we have to tackle it. If it has not happened, we have to make sure it doesn't happen. So basically we divide the entire congestion control mechanism into two categories. One is the open loop and other is the closed loop. So open loop are related to prevention and closed loop are related to the removal. So under the open loop, we have retransmission policy, window policy, acknowledgement policy, discarding policy, and admission policy. Under the closed loop, we have back pressure, choke packet, implicit signaling, and explicit signaling. So these are the different mechanisms that we have to understand once we read the congestion control for the network layer. Now, open loop congestion control, whatever is being written here in this diagram, we are going to discuss it one by one. First one, retransmission policy. So we know what is the meaning of retransmission. We know when the sender is going to retransmit, when it doesn't get the acknowledgement, right? And sender feels like I need to send it again. So retransmission sometimes is unavoidable. You cannot put any kind of rules or any kind of restriction that retransmission should not occur. Sometimes you can, but most of the times it is completely unavoidable because it is at the discretion of the sender whether to send it or not. So if the sender may feel that the sent packet is lost or corrupted, the packet needs to be retransmitted because it is the duty of the sender to send it, and until and unless it starts receiving the acknowledgement for those packets, it will retransmit it. This is the basic nature. Now the retransmission may increase the congestion in the network. We understood it already. A good retransmission policy can prevent the congestion as well. And this retransmission policy and retransmission timer must be designed to optimize the efficiency and at the same time prevention of the congestion. So what is being said, we discussed that sometimes the congestion might occur due to the retransmission of the packets from the sender. So how to control it? So let's control the retransmission policy. Let's make the policy like that we should have some kind of timer. The timer should be little longer or making sense as per the network capacity, so that the retransmission does not occur in a manner which increases the congestion in the system. It should basically optimize the efficiency of the system and prevent the congestion. So this is the retransmission policy, to have a kind of policy where the transmission timers are designed in such a way so that the congestion doesn't occur. This is the retransmission policy. Now second is the window policy. So we know that what is the window. Window is something that is being displayed by the receiver, that I have the capacity like this only, please don't send more than this to me, otherwise I might lose some of the packets. So that is the window that is being portrayed by the, or like kind of broadcasted by the receivers in the network. So here the type of window at the sender may also affect the congestion. So we have different kinds of window policy. Number first is the selective repeat window, which is better than go back end window for the congestion control. So these are the two different techniques for the window policy. We will understand what happens in these two, selective repeat and go back end. So in the go back end window, when the timer for the packet times out, so basically there is a timer for every packet. There is a time to live which is being assigned to every packet, and once that packet is once that TTL, that is time to live, is expired, the packet is automatically dropped from the network. So whenever the timer for a packet times out, several packets may be resent. So if something is being dropped out, definitely it doesn't reaches the receiver, so it needs to be retransmitted. So it will be resent. Although some may have arrived safe and sound at the receiver. What happened? Sometimes it may be lost in the network. Sometimes it might be reached at the receiver, but the acknowledgement is not being made. So here the duplication may make the congestion work, was basically when you say in the go back and in the selective repeat, it tries to send the specific packet that have been lost or corrupted. So selective repeat will say repeat the transmission of only those packets who are actually being corrupted or lost. Don't apply this to everyone. Like don't apply the rule universally. Apply it selectively. But the go back end doesn't do that all. It works for the timer. And if during that timer you are not getting the acknowledgement, then you have to go through the resend policy. So these are the two things which are there for the what you say window policy. Is this okay? These 2 points are okay? Okay. Now, acknowledgement policy. So the acknowledgement policy is imposed by the receiver. It may also affect the congestion. So if the receiver doesn't acknowledge every packet it receives, the sender will slow down itself to help to prevent the congestion. So the sender will get to know that at the rate at which the packets are being sent is higher as compared to the rate at which the acknowledgement is being received by the from the receiver. So sender will be like, let's slow down. Receiver does not have that capability. So it should prevent the congestion. So there are many approaches that you can use in this case, and the receiver may send the acknowledgement only if the packet has to be sent for a if the packet needs to be sent or a special timer expire. Otherwise, the receiver get to decide whether to acknowledge the packet at the time or not. So basically what it is saying, let's not acknowledge every packet. Let's it be the rule by the receiver or by the system that if some packets are lost, then you might not be sending acknowledgement for that, or you send only acknowledgement for those for which your timer expires. Okay, so for those all things where your timer expires or you're not able to receive the packet, you send the acknowledgement so that the sender will send only those things. So the acknowledgement policy, because sending an acknowledgement also increases the load on the system, so send the acknowledgement for only those for which you don't have any kind of data, so that the sender can send you that only. Okay, otherwise the receiver may decide to acknowledge only n packet at a time. Like receiver will say, you keep on sending, I will not acknowledge any packet, or I will acknowledge only some certain number of packets. So it will also decrease the load on the system, and the congestion will be avoided. Now, the next policy is the discarding policy. A good discarding policy which can be applied on the router, because routers, when they are overloaded with their input buffers and output buffers, they decide to lose some of the packets by their own that may not harm the integrity of the transmission. So basically this entire discarding policy has to be made sure so that there is no data which is already being the part of system for very long, it's discarded. The system admits any new data, and if you need to apply discarding policy, you apply the discarding policy on that new data rather than on the data which is there in the system for a long time, because it might happen that the data because definitely the data is not set as an atomic unit. A good piece of data is being broken down into several packets, and then it is being sent. So if something is in the system for a very long time, we will avoid to drop it. We will drop those things which are newly admitted only. So discarding policy, it can be also applied on the routers to prevent the congestion. Now, admission policy. So admission policy is basically a kind of quality of service mechanism which will also prevent the kind of congestion which we have in the networks. So basically, you can read it here. Switches in the flow first check the resource requirement of the flow before admitting it to the network. Router can deny the establishment of the virtual circuit connection if there is a congestion in the network, or if there is a possibility of future congestion. So definitely switches and routers are there to transfer the data from sender to the receiver. So if the switch is getting to know that I'm already overloaded and the system is already overloaded, please then switch will not take that packet itself, because it is already loaded. So admission policy, whom to admit, whom not to admit, when to admit, when not to admit. That is one thing which can reduce the load on the system. The second thing is that the router, because routers are not connected physically, they are connected with a virtual circuit. And if there is a connection in those networks, then, or if there is any possibility for the congestion also, the router will not take the packet, because it knows that there is a congestion in the network, so better not to take the packet to avoid the congestion. So different things at the admission in the network devices can be applied to prevent the congestion in the network. So these were the 5 policies that we discussed for the open loop: retransmission, window policy, acknowledgement policy, discarding policy, and the admission policy. Are these policies clear? Okay. Now, the second thing that we need to understand, these were the ones that we discussed are actually implemented to avoid it, like to prevent the congestion, so that the congestion should not occur. They are preventive approaches. Now we are allowing the system to go in the congestion. And once the congestion is being detected, then what we are doing? We are trying to remove the congestion. So closed loop congestion control, they are basically for the removal of the congestion. So the very first thing is the back pressure. What is the back pressure? So you can see here, there is a diagram where from where the source to the destinations are connected with some different router 1, 2, 3, and 4, or the switches, whatever is the network devices responsible to send from source to the destination. So basically this technique of back pressure refers to the congestion control mechanism in which a congested node stop receiving data from the immediate upstream node or nodes. So basically you can see 1, 2, 3, 4. They are the 4 nodes. And let's say the node number 3 is now in congestion. It is congested. So it is receiving the data from second. Second is receiving the data from the first. And first is receiving the data from the source. Now what will happen? Congestion, when it is occurring at point number 3 or the router number 3, it will be like, I am congested, please don't send me more data. I will apply a back pressure telling node number 2, please don't send me the data, I am not having that capacity. Node 2 will send that same message to node 1. Node 3 is having congestion, don't send the data at this speed. Then node 1 will transfer this message to the source that we don't have this network capacity, there is a congestion in the network, and you better stop or better slow down sending the packets. So basically this particular back pressure technique is node to node congestion control that starts with the node and propagate in the opposite direction of the data flow to the source. So source is sending from left to right, and congestion of like back pressure is sent from right to left. So in the opposite direction, you can see the back pressure is being sent. This back pressure technique can be applied only to the virtual circuit networks in which each node know the upstream node from which the data is coming. So basically you should be able to know your neighbors from where the data is coming, immediate neighbors. So if you don't know that, then you can't apply the back pressure technique. Otherwise you can apply the back pressure technique if you know who is your neighbor. So this is the thing, congestion occurred, then how to reduce it, how to prevent, like how to remove it, apply the back pressure. So the ultimately the source will get to know that there is a congestion in the network and I have to slow down and avoid the congestion. So this is the first one, back pressure. Then here whatever I have told you, that is being written. Node 3 in the figure has more input data than it can handle, so it drops some packets in its from its input buffer and inform node 2 to slow down. Node 2 in turn will maybe congested because it is slowing down the output flow of the data, because the data which was being sent from 2 to 3 is now not being sent properly, because 3 is saying I'm not going to handle it more. So the output buffer of 2 is congested now. So now 2 is going to send the same thing to 1 to slow down, which may like node 1 will inform the source of the data to slow down. And in this time, it elevates the congestion, but the pressure on node 3 is moved backward to the source, and it removes the congestion basically. So during the back pressure also, it is a kind of thing which will increase the congestion, but after some time you will have the congestion removed from the system. Is this clear? Nice. Now, choke packet. What is the choke packet? Choke packet uh, is also something which will be like traveling in the system and letting the system know if there is a congestion or not. How it is exactly happening, let's understand. Choke packet is also a packet sent by node to the source to inform the congestion. So what we are doing right now, there is a congestion in between the routers and we are sending that information to the source, either node by node or by some choke packet. So choke packet is like immediately informing the, like not immediately, but informing that there is a congestion in the network. So if the source will receive a choke packet, then the source will get to know, okay, there is a kind of congestion in the network. Now the difference between the back pressure and this choke packet is what? In back pressure, the warning is sent from node to node, hop to hop. Like 3 will send it to 2, 2 to 1. But in choke packet, 3 will directly send it back to the source. Okay. So basically, it will be more faster. So in the choke packet method, the warning is from the router, which has encountered the congestion, which is in congestion happening at router 3 to the source station directly. In the back pressure, it was 3, 2, 1, and then the source. Here it will directly from 3 to the source. So this is more faster. And the intermediate nodes through which the data has arrived are not warned. So basically 1 and 2 will never get to know whether 3 was congested or not. In the back pressure, 1 and 2 already know that 3 is congested. But in this approach, they will never get to know that 1 and 2 will never get to know that they are being congested. 3 will directly send the message to the source that there is a congestion. Choke packet is a special packet, like which will have the meaning that there is a kind of choking in the system. So better you slow down. So the source will slow down. Is this clear? Yes. Now, implicit signaling and explicit signaling. What does that mean? In implicit signaling, there is no communication between the congested node or the nodes and the source. So there is no communication. Like nobody is telling anyone that there is a congestion. You understand itself. For example, if I'm asking continuously, are you able to understand? Are you able to understand? And nobody is replying me, then I have to implicitly understand that there is some problem in the class where people are not able to understand things. So I have to implicitly understand it without any word coming from the students that there is something which is not correct. So here the source has the responsibility to guess if there is a congestion somewhere in the network or not. And how does it does? If the source is not receiving the acknowledgement for a while, then it will assume then the network might be congested. That's why I'm not getting the acknowledgement. So basically, if there is a lot of delay in receiving the acknowledgement, the source will interpret it as the congestion in the network, and the source will itself slow down without being informed or warned by anyone in the network that you need to slow down or not. It will automatically slow down. That is called as implicit signaling. Understanding things from, like, it will say understand without saying. So this is kind of thing. Without saying, people understand. That is implicit signaling. Explicit signaling is that you need to tell it. Now, the node that have experienced the congestion can explicitly send a signal back to the source or through the destination. And here the explicit signaling method work, and it is different from the choke packet method. In the choke packet method, a separate packet called as choke packet which was used basically. So in choke packet, there was a special packet, choke packet. If the source is receiving the choke packet, okay, there is a kind of congestion. In explicit signaling, what happens? The signal which is sent to the source that, hey, you need to slow down, it includes the packet that carry the data. So which data due to which the congestion has started, or the kind of the data, basically it is not something which is special having kind of a separate meaning, a special kind of packet. It is actually the data which is actually involved in the transmission, that is itself being sent back, so that the source will get to know, okay, now I have the duplicacy of the packets with me. It is meaning that there is a kind of explicit signaling coming from intermediate devices that I need to slow down. So this is about the explicit signaling. Now, backward signaling and forward signaling. So backward signaling, what it is like a bit can be sent in the packet moving in the direction opposite to the congestion basically. So what is happening here? So if there is any kind of congestion, so a bit will be sent back in the opposite direction, and it will warn the source that there is a connection and you need to slow down in order to avoid discarding of the packets in the network. Then forward signaling, here the bit will be sent in the moving direction of the congestion, meaning in the same direction in which the source is sending, and this bit warns the destination that there is a congestion, and the receiver in this case can use different kinds of policies like slowing down the acknowledgements and elevate the congestion. So basically, both the source and receiver can handle the congestion. Most of the time, it will be source only. Sometimes it can be receiver also. So if it is forward signaling, then the responsibility comes with the receiver, that if you receive any forwarding bit which says that there is a kind of congestion in the network, then you need to apply some of the mechanism, after which the source will get to know that there is a kind of congestion in the network. So this is the forward and the backward signaling. Is this clear? Okay, so this was all that you need to understand for the network layer congestion control. And yes, then I will give you the PDF for the transport layer and the data link layer, because you have understood the congestion control, what is congestion control, how it works. Then there will be like hardly 5 to 6 pages that you need to read, and that will be done for the congestion control in the transport as well as in the data link layer. So basically congestion can happen at any point of time at data link layer, at network, and as well as the transport layer. So this is the point that we have done. Now let me give me a second. Okay, now application layer protocols. So I have written it like application layer protocols because most of the protocols are from the application layer, but better to make it like protocols only. Let's make it like protocol only. So basically these are the protocols in networking. So how many protocols? HTTP, HTTPS, DNS, SMTP, POP, IMAP, FTP, IP, and some other protocols like RARP. Then you have ARP, many different protocols. So these are the important protocols that you need to learn, and a great detail about these things are being covered here. Total, this particular PPT is having, I think, 32 or 31 slides. And if you cover this all, you have covered most of the, what you say, protocols, which are important for the exam. So let's see how to read it and how it is being there. So HTTP protocol. So first you need to understand the full form for every protocol. What is the full form for the protocols? So here HTTP is for the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. Now you need to understand that this protocol belongs to which layer in the OSI model. So if the, like, let's say HTTP protocol. So when I say HTTP protocol, it works at the application layer of the OSI model. So you should know every time that which particular protocol is working at which layer. So we discussed about TCP and UDP also, which we will not discuss in this particular one. So the TCP and UDP protocols that we discussed in the transport layer, we know that they are operating at the transport layer, right? So for every particular protocol, the very first thing is that you should know the full form. Second thing is that you should know at which layer it is working. Third, what is the function of that protocol? Fourth, the port number responsible for the protocol. These are the 4 more important stuff that you need to know, which is static and might come as in part of statement to identify whether the statement is true or false, or maybe as the part of MCQ, direct MCQ also. So that is the thing that you need to take care. Most of the time, HTTP and HTTPS port number are asked in the exams, and remember these are two different port numbers, but people mark in hurry and they get a negative answers. So the very first thing, the full form; second, at which layer; third, the functioning; fourth, the port number. These you need to know. Then fifth, what kind of protocol it is: connectionless or connection oriented. This is also something that you need to know. Now, HTTP is an internet-based protocol for sending and receiving the web page. This is the function of the HTTP protocol, for sending and receiving the web pages. Now, it works at application layer. The port number responsible is 8080, so you can write it as 80 also. It is connectionless protocol, and only one connection per request response is being made. So once we say it is connectionless protocol, you need to understand what happens in connectionless protocol: direct data transfer. It doesn't bother about the connection establishment, then data transfer, and then connection termination. So it will directly start transferring of the data. So if the HTTP protocol is connectionless, it should use TCP as the service, because TCP is connection oriented. If some protocol is connection oriented, then it might use UDP protocol, because UDP protocol is connectionless. So the disadvantage of having UDP protocol can be countered with the help of the protocol, which itself is the connection oriented protocol. So that's why connectionless or connection oriented comes in the picture. If you are having a protocol which is connectionless, better to go with the TCP for the transport layer, or the SCTP in the transport layer. Otherwise, if the protocol itself is able to handle the connection oriented or connection orientation, then you can go with the UDP also for the faster results. So you have to understand why you have to know the connectionless and connection oriented nature of any particular protocol. Now, HTTP, what it basically do, that we understood that it is for the sending, and like HTTP request will be sent from client to server, and you will get a HTTP reply from the server to the client. Now, HTTPS, this is called as Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure. Now, what is the difference? This is also for sending and receiving the web pages. The nature is same, but here the transfer of the data happen in an encrypted manner. And here the port number is 443, and it uses the SSL, that is Secure Socket Layer technology. This is very important. This is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS. So you can say, if you are communicating over HTTP, whatever you are sending, the strings of the data are getting transmitted as it is. But if you are sending it over HTTPS, you can see there is a kind of encryption which is being done over the link. So nobody can see what exactly the data is being sent. It is kind of encrypted, not sending the exact data, sending the encrypted data. So encrypted data will be sent from client to server. Server will decrypt the data and understand the data and send our response back to the client. And here that response will also be encrypted, and the client will decrypt the response based on some encryption and decryption mechanism, public private key cryptography, and then the communication will establish, so that no attacker in between get an easy access to the data as compared to the HTTP. It is not like HTTP is secure and it cannot get compromised. It can get compromised, but it will take a little bit more of a time as compared to HTTP to make the system compromise, or to get the data which is getting transmitted over the network. So this is the basic difference, and this is the important information that you need to know. This is again the application layer protocol. Are you able to understand how to read the protocols? What all information you need to know about the protocols? You don't need to master the protocol. No need to remember some specific short. There are some special signals in the protocols. You don't need to understand them. These are the 4 or 5 information that you need to know for every protocol that you might come across. Is this okay? Okay. Now let's move to the SSL. So we spoke about the SSL in the HTTP, that HTTP plus SSL will give you HTTPS. What is SSL? Secure Socket Layer. So this is a kind of standard security technology which will help you to establish an encrypted link between the two systems. Now here the browser and the server, or the server or to the server, or the client to the server, these can use these services, and it ensures that the data which is transmitted is encrypted and private, and it is not known to everyone. Okay. Now next thing that we need to know, how it works, how basically the entire SSL is working. So understand this with this example. You are the user and you are using a secure website. Okay. Once you are using this website, you need to browse something. You will be on internet, you need to browse something. Then there comes the role of the DNS. So whenever we browse something over the internet, we write like www.google.com, or let's say amazon.com, or whatever the website you want to visit. We will write the name of the website, but at the end, it is the IP which works, right? It is not the name which works. So there is a kind of translation which happens from the name to the IP, and from the IP to the name also. So that translation task is done by DNS, that is domain name servers. We will discuss about domain name servers in detail, but here, because the second point mentioned the DNS records, that's why I'm telling you this. So basically, whatever name you are writing, let's say google.com. So google.com will have a kind of IP address, and this directory that google.com has, let's say 192.68.54.12, let's say this is the IP for the server to which you will be pinging. There will be a kind of mapping. So the conversion will happen from google.com to that IP through the DNS records. So first checking will be done at the DNS record, that what is the IP address. Once you get the IP address, you will be able to access that website record, right? Because now you know the address where the data is being residing. So here, this particular presumes that the SSL has already been issued by the SSL issuing authority. So basically, secure socket layer is working, and it assumes that now you will have a SSL certificate which will make sure that the system to which you are communicating is now getting secured. So you will request for a secure SSL connection from the website host. So the website host google.com, and your system will be connected through an encrypted link after the step number 4. Now the host will respond back with a valid SSL certificate, and once the host responds back to the reply back to the response with a SSL certification, there is a green link which you can see, which is encrypted, which is being established, and now over this link the data will be transferred, and nobody will be able to understand that data directly. This is the working of the HTTPS. Basically, the major step is the step number 4 and 5. Whenever you get the IP of the server to which you will be pinging, you will get the SSL connection established from the host to the client, and after this has been done properly, you will have a secure socket connection through which you are going to transfer the data. So this is how exactly the SSL is going to work. Now give me a second. Domain name systems, no, not server, system. Yeah, so basically in some books you will find server also, and system is also okay. So domain name system, what it is, basically we understood it in the step number 2, that there is something which is called as domain name systems. What is this? So this is basically the phone book of the internet. Earlier, when we were not having mobile phones, we need to write our numbers of, like, whatever numbers we have, we used to maintain a notebook, and we used to write the numbers and the name of the person to which the number belongs. So that was a kind of phone book. In the similar manner, you have a phone book for the internet, because you cannot remember the IP for everyone. You can remember the names, but you cannot remember the IP for everyone. So this is the phone book for the internet. Here, human access the information online through the domain names. For example, let's say exambi.com or amazon.in or google.com, whatever you say. So there are different kinds of websites through which you will be able to access it. Now here, the web browser interacts through the IP address. Basically, web browser doesn't know that what is google.com. Web browser will get to know what is the IP of the google.com, because it is designed in that manner only. So here basically what will happen, they need to have a kind of translation. We write our code in source code, then it get translated to the assembly code or to the machine level code, right? In the similar manner, whatever we write as the domain name, that will get translated to the IP. So here DNS will translate the domain names to the IP address so that the browser can load the internet resources which you are requesting from the server. Here the internet service provider, which from where you are getting the service, is associated with the DNS, and it translates it to the machine friendly IP address. For example, let's say this for this, and will direct your connection to the correct website. Now, what is the port number which DNS is using? It is using 53 as the port number. So remember the port number of the DNS. Now, DNS is basically an application layer protocol, and okay, I think we are up by the time. I will give you the link for the next session, and we will resume from there. Okay, so now let's understand DNS as an application layer protocol. So remember, DNS is an application layer protocol, and how it exactly works, we will see the detail of DNS. There are more than these number of steps which are being currently shown. There are more number of steps, but this is a kind of overview through which you will be able to understand how DNS is working. So basically what will happen, you will start from step number 1, that you need the address for, let's say, google.com. Here we have written it like as an example.com. So let's understand that I want the access to the google.com. So what I will do, first whatever I want to find, I will send that request. I will type that request in my address bar, and then I will press enter. Now what will happen, this request will go to the DNS resolver. There are different components in the DNS protocol. The very first one that you will be having is the DNS resolver. So DNS resolver is basically a kind of cache. You know what is cache? Cache is a kind of special memory which have the links to the frequently accessed resources, be it with your computer or be it with the internet. So for the DNS resolver, you have a kind of cache. So first of all, if that particular URL is being addressed or it is being requested very frequently by you, so you will have the resolver cache. So first the resolver will check whether in that particular cache does it have the IP or not. If it doesn't have the IP in the cache, it will query the DNS. So it will then go to the DNS servers and will say that look, this is not in my cache. Do you have the IP for example.com? Then DNS will say, yes, I have it and I can send it to you. So DNS will find it and will send it back to the DNS resolver. Now the DNS resolver has the IP, and your browser will now get the IP for what domain name you have searched for. So now your browser knows that for example.com you have x.y.z.t as the IP. Now you have the IP. Now you can establish a direct connection with the example.com web server because you have the IP. So now once you get it back from the step number 6, you will request the data directly from the web server because your web browser is having the IP for the example.com, and then the website whichever you are requesting for the data will give you the connection. You will have the connection, and then it will be all okay. So this is how the DNS works. Now in this DNS entire system, it is not that only one server which is going to give you the services. It is distributed database. and it is maintained in the hierarchy in the name of the servers and how it is maintained. For example, let's say you want to access the drive of the Google. So you will see that in the URL page, URL address bar, you will have drive.google.com. How this is being accessed. So there will be a dot server, which will be called as the DNS root zone. Inside that, there will come a com address, com domain. Inside com you will get google.com, and inside google.com you will get drive.google.com. So when you are accessing drive.google.com, you will get to the root zone. From the root zone you will search, okay, what is the domain is com, so commercial. So you will go to the com. Inside com you will search for Google. Then inside that you will search for drive.google, and by the third level of this you will be able to get the access to the IP of the drive.google.com. If your address is having more than 3, then you will have more layer. If it is more than that, you will have more layers. So it is like that. You have some generic domains like com for commercial, edu for education, mil, I don't remember the full form for mil right now, org is for organization, .net is for the networking ones. Now countries also have some specific domain names, like .in for India, .uk for UK, .au for Australia. So if there is a specific website which they want to be getting accessed within the country only, they will make it like that in order to get it identified properly. Is this clear? Okay. Now there are 4 main kind of DNS servers which are actually involved when you load a web page. DNS recursion, root name server, TLD server, and authoritative name server. So we will understand this as the library example. You go to a library, then you check with the librarian, then library will guide you to a bookshelf, and inside the bookshelf then you will search for a particular subject, and then you will search for a particular book. So this is all similar to what you'd go and do inside a library. So DNS recursor is kind of a librarian. Here the server designed to receive the query from the client through the web browser. So whenever you enter a library, the first one to whom you will contact is the librarian. So here you will go to the DNS recursor. Now the next thing that you will be going is that root name server. So here the first step in the translation of the human readable host to the IP. So root name server will basically will tell you what will be the kind of translation. So it will be an index pointing to the rack in the library, that you go to that rack in the library and you will find your resource. Now there will be a TLD server, that is called as top level domain server, which will help you to identify a specific rack for that particular book, and it will deal with the host domains like .com, .in, .au, .uk, .edu, whatever it is. Then there comes the final server, which is authoritative name server. Here it works like a dictionary. It will translate your host name explicitly to the IP address, and this is the last one to resolve your query, and here you will have your book in your hand. So it will simply return you the IP address to the recursor. So basically from DNS recursor, root name server to TLS server, then to the authoritative name server, and then the response is sent back to the DNS recursor. You took that book and then you go to the librarian, issue me this book. So this is the example how you can relate to the 4 important servers which are involved in the loading of a web page. There might be more, but these are the 4 most important also. Now, this is the example. You go to the recursive name server, it will go to the root server. Getting the response from the root server will go to TLD server. Getting the response from the TLD server will go to authoritative servers. And now from there, you will get the final response, and then you get access to the example.com. Right? Is this all clear? Now, I will not explain this diagram. You take your time and understand that, are you able to understand all the 8 steps which are written here? Read it one by one and let me know if you are able to understand it or not. Okay. Sangeeta, are you also able to understand it properly? Nice. Good. So now I will tell you what all different different protocols we have now. SMTP protocol, this is for simple mail transfer protocol. Here what you have, uh, you know the service of email. You send something and you receive something. So you send a mail, you also receive a mail. So two protocols are responsible, one for sending, one for receiving. The one responsible for sending is called as SMTP protocol, that is simple mail transfer protocol. Remember S for sending and S for simple mail transfer protocol, so that you don't confuse yourself. The one responsible for sending is actually SMTP. So this particular is also an application layer protocol, and this is a push protocol because it is used to push the mails to the mail servers. So here what happens, whenever you are trying to provide any kind of mail to anyone, you are trying to send some mail to anyone, so you will have a SMTP connection to the SMTP server. Now whatever mail you want to type, you will type it, you will try to send it to the receiver through the internet. So what will happen? First, you will send it and it will be there with the SMTP server. Then SMTP server will further push it to the internet, and then you will have like with the help of internet, then this particular through the same SMTP connection, you will get access to the mail server of the receiver. And the mail server of the receiver who is responsible for fetching the mails and receiving the mail is called as POP or IMAP server, because the protocol there, it is POP or IMAP. So basically there is one protocol, that is only one protocol for sending, that is SMTP. For receiving mails there are two protocols, POP protocol and IMAP, so IMAP protocol. So the basic the communication happens like, you want to send something like the client, then the SMTP server, then the internet, then the POP or IMAP server, and then it is finally the receiver who is going to receive the mail. So this is how the flow goes. Now the SMTP port numbers, there are many SMTP port numbers, and these are few which I have written in the green one. So the oldest one is 25. Then 465 is registered with the SMTP port by IANA. 587 is also for the mail submission. It is the best choice. And 2525 is also used if all the above ports are blocked. So these are the four ports which are used by the SMTP. So remember these are phone numbers, so that if any kind of question comes on the port of SMTP, you know it. Now here, this is the flow, how everything happens. So the client who wants to send an email open in TCP connection to the SMTP server, then sends the mail across the connection. This SMTP server is always on the listening mode. You know now that servers are always in the listening mode, but they cannot establish a connection by their own. The request has to come from the client. So as soon as it gets that request for that TCP connection, a connection will be established between the client and the TCP and the SMTP server. Now whatever port it is being there, everything will be established, and after successful establishment of the connection, the client will send the mail instantly to the POP or IMAP server. Now what is the situation when we get the mail to the POP protocol? So POP protocol is basically post office protocol. Now the letter is being sent and it is residing in your letter box. So the letter box is your POP protocol. So it is also very simple protocol, and it is used for downloading the email messages from the local computer. So basically you have the email in your email server. Now from that email server, you have to download it to your local computer once you have the connection with your local computer to the internet. And it is also a application layer protocol, and it is just picking up the mail from the mail server and putting it to the computer. Now it listens to 110. POP is having SSL, which is called as POP3 protocol, which is the POP3 version, latest version you can say. And this one listens to the 995. So the original POP listens to 110 port, and POP3 with SSL will listen to 995. Now there are two versions more, which is POP2 and POP3. They are just different versions with some enhanced features of security and things like that, different port numbers. Here what happens, the incoming email messages are stored in the POP server until you log in and download the messages to the computer. So you know, if your system is not connected to the internet, you are not going to receive any new mail. So first you have to establish the connection to the internet. Once that is done, the POP protocol will actually do its task for downloading all the new mails to the to the device. Here POP is a limited protocol that allow an email program to only download the messages to the computer or devices. With the POP, you can't access the same email account on the multiple device, and they have action synchronization between them. So basically what happens, let's say I opened a mail on my internet, on my mobile phone, and when I open the same mail on my same email account on my computer, and if I have read that mail from my mobile phone, I get to see that this mail is already being read. So it is kind of a synchronization which is happening between mobile phone and the computer through the same email. When you are using POP protocol, you cannot get these syncing services, and you cannot access the same email account from multiple devices at the same time. So the Gmail which you are accessing is not using POP protocol, because you are able to log into your Gmail account through multiple devices, right? So that is the protocol which is called as IMAP protocol, which helps you to maintain, like to log in your email account through different devices also. And this is called as Internet Messaging Access Protocol. Here with the IMAP, you can log in at your work, at your road, or to your phone or a email client. You can do a lot of things, right? So this is also doing the same thing, but it helps you to synchronize the applications on different devices with the same email. Now, this is also an application layer protocol. Here, the emails that are stored and organized into the folders. You can see you have inbox folder, promotion folder, update folder, spam folder, trash folder, bin folder. How the mails which are coming to you for the very first time or are reported as a spam get into the spam folder automatically. This all thing has been done with the help of IMAP protocol. So these are the advanced features of the IMAP protocol which make it more complex, but they are more secure and more organized. So after you send a message through SMTP, for example, it must be transmitted through the IMAP to be stored in the sent folder of the IMAP account. This is the thing how it works when you have folder-wise structures. IMAP uses 143, 993, like 143 without SSL, 993 over the SSL as the port numbers. You have to remember the port numbers. Now, next is the IP protocol. We have read about IP protocol in great detail. So this slide we have, I think, covered well. Then we have ARP, RARP, FTP, Telnet, SSL. SSL we have discussed as well. And then a table, which will help you to understand some of these states and the underlying transport layer protocol and these things. Some of the kind of small stuff which can be very useful for you. So I think these protocols are easy, and you can read from the slide number 21 by yourself. ARP protocol, how it works, RARP protocol, difference between these two, FTP and Telnet. So these four you can read by yourself. If you feel like you are not able to understand them properly, then we can discuss them in the next class. And otherwise, I think you can easily read it out and it will be done. And if you have any issue, you are not able to understand any of these four protocols, RARP, ARP, and what next was there, Telnet and FTP, then you let me know. I will help you in the next class. So by this, you cover the most important protocols in the networking as well. Remember, these are the static things. You need to know the concept, and before the exam, revise it so that if there comes a question, you are able to write the answer. Fine. So that was all for today from my end. Do you have any questions?